Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, please turn off all electronic devices. Please refrain from using flash photography during the program. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Scott McEwen.
Scott right there next to him. I heard the "aw." Well, good evening, everyone. My name's John Highbush. I have the honor of being the Executive Director of the Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. In honor of our men and women who defend our freedom around the world, if you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. So before we begin, I'd like to recognize a special guest that we have with us this evening, and that would be Scott McEwen's son, also named Scott, who has joined us this evening. Scott, will you stand up? He's still perfecting that wave to the crowd. Yeah. Well, for those of you who are fortunate enough to come here often and to hear from our special guests, you know that this is Scott McEwen's first invitation to appear at the Reagan Library. And I have a very strong feeling that it won't be his last. I say that because Scott, simply put, has demonstrated an ability to do two things. The first is to write, and I mean write extremely well. And second is his ability to capture in that writing the story of men and women and their families who, at their very essence, demonstrate uncanny skills and heroism, patience, sacrifice in the course of defending or supporting our freedoms every day that they go to work or protect the home front. Scott is here this evening not to give a speech, but actually rather to have a conversation with us about his most recent book, American Commander, the remarkable account of Ryan Zinke, former SEAL team commander and member of Congress from Montana. But an important program note, if I may. We had originally planned to have both Scott and Ryan Zinke with us tonight, but as I'm sure all of you are aware, President Trump got to him first, not surprisingly, and reached out to Congressman Zinke and asked if he would agree to become our nation's 52nd Secretary of the Interior. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. So as much as we'd love to have him here, and I'm sure he eventually will be here, we agreed it might be a better idea for Representative Zinke to stay in Washington, D.C., where a vote on his nomination is near imminent. And I know that Scott would join me in wishing the Congressman well in what I am certain will be not only a strong vote of support for him in the U.S. Senate, but also years of success as our nation's Interior Secretary. But back to our story and our writer. Before Scott set out to co-author American Commander, this incredible account of Congressman Zinke's role leading the elite of our fighting forces, he brought to us a truly valuable and lasting account of the life of Chris Kyle. Chris's story was told by Scott in his now famous #1 New York Times bestselling book, American Sniper. And for you movie buffs in the audience, you already know that American Sniper was made into the highest grossing war film of all time, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Bradley Cooper, nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including his role as Best Actor in the film. As an aside, it is no secret that we here at the Reagan Library wear our patriotism on our sleeves. This past year, we had Chris Kyle's wife, Taya, here to tell Chris's story, as well as Marcus Luttrell, a SEAL mate of both Congressman Zinke and Chris Kyle, who was the subject of the best-selling book and movie, Lone Survivor. Now, straight to Scott's book. Each of us, I believe, has a way of describing for a friend or a family member, or in my case, an audience, just how much you might have enjoyed reading a particular book. Most of us decide what to read based on the observations of our friends or our family. My test is a bit unique. Most of the books I read are those authors who come to the Reagan Library, like Scott. So I read a lot of books. But every so often, I run across a book that is so good and so engrossing that I lose track of time, and I run out of it before I've had a chance to write a lofty introduction of the author who deserves it. So forgive me for such a brief introduction of Scott, if you would, but I spent almost all of my prep time reading his book, and there is so much to say about his success beyond the book, about the work he does to support our nation's military charitable organizations, including the Navy SEAL Foundation, or about his terrific national best-selling fiction series called Sniper Elite. Fortunately, I have the chance to ask Scott to come on stage with me for a one-on-one interview about American Commander, and as we near the top of the hour, what I'd like to do is turn the questions over to you in the audience and have you ask questions of your own. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library, Mr. Scott McEwen. You're over here, Scott.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Well, Scott, thanks so much for coming. I know you know Scott does a lot of things, including he's a trial attorney. He's busy, probably now writing his I don't know what number book it will be, Scott.
8.
But your 8th book, okay.
I'm a recovering trial attorney.
But yeah, for sure he stays busy. But there's no first question off the bat, Scott, is American Sniper was such a hit. The very, very top, as you know. What made you think, okay, I can pull it off again? I mean,
I think, especially with writing a book about Chris, I never really envisioned that book would be a bestseller, let alone a #1 New York Times bestseller for months before it became an unbelievable movie and then went back on the bestseller list and became a #1 bestseller again for months. So as far as that success is concerned, I think you would have to be extremely arrogant or Leon Uris or James Michener to actually expect that for the result, and I was neither. So the thing that is amazing for me as a writer is to be introduced to stories that are so compelling and so absolutely just grab you, by the stomach and it won't let you go, and it won't let you go. And when I heard Chris's story for the first time and the second time and the 20th time, and when he was staying at my house because he was having so much trouble with Taya, not that they were having trouble because it was her or him or anything else, but they were going through 4 deployments, 10 years at war, all the things that add up to an extremely difficult situation to live with as a family. As a family, it was very difficult for them to do it. I just felt like this was a shot of Americana that really needed to be told. I mean, it just had to be told. The story was, and the fact that he was the #1 sniper in United States military history of all time obviously got people through the door, but it didn't get them inside, and want to be inside the story. And I think that once you got inside that story, you realize that it not only related to him, but 300 to 500,000 other men and women that have been deployed in this country back to back to back for 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So it was just a compelling story, and I just felt like it was one that had to be told as a writer and a historian. I mean, when I go through this place, I stop and I'm amazed, at the history that Ronald Reagan created and the things that he did for this nation. And I just felt like Chris was this generation's addition to that story.
All that. Yeah. Now the movie, as noted, just became an enormous blockbuster. Can you tell us, did you play any role in helping make the movie come about, advice behind the scenes. Tell me, where did you sit vis-a-vis the movie?
I did, and I was technically a consultant, but that really wasn't what I did. What happened was in 2012, the book was released, and it became a huge hit. And when it becomes a huge hit, and then becomes a #1 New York Times bestseller, and then sits there for 2 or 3 months, you get all these phone calls from LA and from Hollywood, and everybody wants to do your book, and everybody wants to be your best friend, and everybody wants this and that. And it, as a then practicing lawyer, I had a certain amount of, let's just say, caution about who we were going to give this story to and how that was going to be given, because sometimes when you give up the rights to your story, you give up the rights to the man. And so Hollywood can do things with stories sometimes that are not the best in my experience as a reader, as well as someone who watches movies. So it was very important to me that the right team was chosen to tell Chris's story in film. And so Chris was then in Texas and running his company Kraft and putting his marriage back together, and things were going well for him. And I'd call every now and then and say, look, somebody wants to do this and somebody wants to do that. And he's like, just take care of it. Go ahead, take care of it. So I was kind of given the, if you will, job to make sure that we got the right people together in LA, in Hollywood, to do the movie. And one thing led to another. The producer that took the film on, who's a very good man, his name's Andrew Lazar. He runs Mad Chance Productions at Warner Brothers. We chose him, and I said, Chris, I think this is the right guy. And he said, well, who is he? And I said, he's done a lot of pretty interesting films, some of which are in genre, some aren't, but he did a film, with Clint Eastwood called Space Cowboys. And, he's the only guy that was honest to me that said, I don't know that I can get it in front of him. I don't know that he'll take it, but I'll make sure that he reads it once we get the script done. And that being Clint Eastwood. And he's like, well, I want Clint Eastwood. And I said, I would love to see Clint Eastwood do your movie. Obviously, he's in his own world, in his own class. So I said, let's go with it then. And then Bradley Cooper, received a phone call. I received a phone call from Bradley, and then I called up Chris, and Bradley said, I want to play you. And so we had that, and then Warner Brothers said, well, if Bradley's going to do it, after he made $3 billion in The Hangover, I guess we'll hire him, and I was very candid with Bradley, and so was Chris. Like, you're going to have to toughen up. This is not a Hollywood event. You're going to have to get dirty, and you're going to have to get some sand in your mouth, and you're going to have to get down in like a seal, or people won't believe it. And Bradley, started working out really hard and played the role, and I thought did an awesome job. And I thought he well deserved the Academy Award nomination. I wish he would have won. But that being said, everything was kind of lining up. And February 2nd of 2013, Chris Kyle's killed. And so, it's kind of like one of those shots from the blue, like literally a blue sky. Here comes a lightning bolt, and what just happened? So the whole world kind of just stops. Obviously, Tay's life stopped. And, so everybody's just kind of figuring what the heck goes on now. And so, the Hollywood thing got put aside, but for them, they then became even more interested, because it had gone from an unbelievably popular novel, or I should say, autobiography, to a unbelievably tragic Greek tragedy. And that's what Hollywood likes for their own reason. And we're not bringing Chris back, so I'm not being critical when I say that, but obviously it brought a different angle to the whole story of Chris Kyle. Shortly thereafter, Steven Spielberg picked it up as a director. A lot of people would be very, very pleased with that. I was kind of like in the middle, honestly, just because I knew Steven's politics were far different than, say, for example, maybe mine or Chris Kyle's. And so I was concerned that, not that he would have done anything differently, but that maybe it wasn't the right thing. He dropped it about 30 days later, which he many times does with projects. Picks them up and then drops them and decides to go on to whatever he does. He's unbelievably good. I'm not being critical. And then I received a phone call about 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning, and the voices I could recognize from any movie that I've seen forever. He said, this is Clint Eastwood. I want to direct your movie. What do you think? And I said, you got the job. And so that's how Clint Eastwood became the director of American Sniper.
Oh, neat. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, once again, if Clint Eastwood hadn't, I believe, given a speech at the Republican convention a couple of years before that, he should have been nominated for Best Director, and he should have won. Okay, so that's just my own bias, but let's just say the Academy has a longer memory than me.
Okay.
You know.
All right, let's turn to Ryan Zinke now for a few minutes. The subject of your newest book, American Commander. How did you come to meet him?
Ryan was introduced to me by Chris Kyle. And obviously when Chris was still with us. Ryan was then running in a primary for an office, or considering running for a primary for a congressman sole congressman in Montana. And Chris said, hey, my buddy wanted me to come up and do something for him for some campaign event. I can't make it, would you go? And I said, well, who's your buddy? And he said, well, Ryan Zinke. And I said, I don't know Ryan, but I'll call him up and I'll talk to him. Republican running for the office, and I'd made a decision that I was going to help as many ex-military as I could to run for national office and do whatever I could to get on the TV or whatever, help them get on the TV or the radio or whatever else, which is many times important when you're trying to start a campaign. And so I ended up getting to know Ryan as a result of that. And then shortly thereafter, once again, February of 2013, Chris was killed. But my relationship with Ryan kind of continued on after that, and then I went to Montana to help him out on a few Reagan-Lincoln dinners, Lincoln-Reagan dinners, and Republican events that took place up there in Montana, which I love Montana. I grew up in Eastern Oregon, so it's just a couple mountain ranges away. Anyway, we got to be good friends, and I got to travel all over the great state of Montana, which is a big state. In his motorhome, helping him with campaign events, and I just got to believe that his story was very, very compelling in a different way than Chris's, in an officer way, looking at how you make the decision who is going to become a Navy SEAL. And I felt like that mentality of an officer looking at these guys like Marcus Luttrell, who he trained, like Chris Kyle, who he trained at BUD/S. He was XO at BUD/S, which is all Navy SEALs have to go through, officer or enlisted. And but that attitude and that what he wants from these men that are going to be these Navy SEALs was fascinating to me. And so, as you know, we covered it in depth in the book, but just an American patriot. I mean, Ryan is an American patriot. We had to take out, this book started out 110 pages longer than what it is right now because of DOD. Every book that I do formerly on any member of the military, I submit to the DOD, which is the rule, and some people don't follow the rule, and they get punished pretty heavily by it. Anyway, but so the DOD, they make some arbitrary decisions, and I'm going to deal with that later, probably now that I have a little bit more influence back in Washington. But you got to go through and you got to deal with it. And Ryan, I'll say it here because I've heard the president say it, and I've heard the vice president say it many times. Ryan was a commander at SEAL Team 6. We had to redact the term 6 from the book completely. The word 6 doesn't exist in this book because they are still taking the position after 35 years of public press, after Osama bin Laden was killed, after all the things that every one of us know, and actually everybody on earth knows about SEAL Team 6. I would say it's a term that's probably almost as recognized as many other in Americana. That's still classified.
Well, in fact, well, all right. So staying away from the classified, but in the book, I know where Ryan, he's in SEAL Team 1, he ends up SEAL Team 6. Can you explain as best you can for the audience, is SEAL Team 6 the elite of the elite, and if so, why is it different or more unique than the other numbered SEAL teams?
Yeah, SEAL Team 6 is a Tier 1 asset. And in the United States military, we have 4 Tier 1 assets, which basically are the Delta Force, the SEAL teams, MARSOC, and there's a division of the United States Air Force Rescue Team that's also considered a Tier 1 asset. What that means is they operate completely independently of any other branch of the military, have their own planes designated to them, their own trains designated to them, cars, vehicles, helicopters, whatever else they need. They can do a mission without calling up any other branch of the military in a 30 minutes notice. 30 minutes, they have to be wheels up, going to wherever they're needed in the world. And so we keep those groups around, and Ryan was there really at the formation of SEAL Team 6. And one of my most interesting stories, I think, in the book is Dick Marcinko formed SEAL Team 6 in 1979 after the Iran rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, went so horribly bad. And Dick Marcinko was asked by the Navy to form SEAL Team 6 at that point in time, just because the Navy said, we don't want to call up the Air Force, we don't want to call up the Army, we don't want to call up anybody else. When we need to get it done, we need to have an asset where they have it all, and the commanders work together, everybody knows the radio frequencies, everybody can work as one harmonic unit, and that's really was the formation of SEAL Team 6. 60 guys were put in SEAL Team 6. At the time, he chose from every part of the SEAL teams to do it, and then 60 guys was the first bunch. Now SEAL Team 6 is between 60 and 100. There's 3 teams within SEAL Team 6, really 4, but we don't talk about the 4th, and because it is classified. But that being said, there is basically an autonomous group called SEAL Team 6 that you take the best of all the other SEAL teams, 1 through 12 now, and you basically ask those men, do you want to join? And then they have to go and try to join, and then they become a part of that fighting force, of which there's basically 4 autonomous platoons, that about 60 men that form SEAL Team 6.
Okay. Can you tell us, as far as you know, what are some of the more famous actions that SEAL Team 6 has been involved in the last decade?
Well, obviously, killing Osama bin Laden would have to be number 1 on the list. That was an unbelievably brave and difficult mission in and of itself. But Captain Phillips, another operation there. There's several that you haven't heard of, rescuing different people in different parts of the world that are out there. But the business is war, and business is good. I mean, these guys do a lot more than people ever understood. And we just lost another member in Yemen recently. But these guys are called on to go to the deepest, darkest parts of the world and kill bad guys. That's what they do. They're not a negotiation force. They're not an extract force. They're not a rescue force. They go kill bad guys. And I'm glad we have them.
Yeah. I think there's a few young people in the audience. I wanted to ask you, Scott, if they were considering joining the military with an idea of joining the SEALs or becoming part of it. What would you recommend they be thinking or doing about right now to prepare?
I think that from my perspective, and it's interesting because, like, for example, with Ryan Zinke, and the story of Ryan Zinke, he's a world-class athlete. I mean, was a scholarship athlete at University of Oregon, 4-year full-ride football scholarship, played on the line at a Division 1A team like Oregon. At 240 pounds, he was a center on the line because he could bench press 650 pounds. I should say he could leg press 650 and bench press over 350, 400. Man, unbelievably strong, 6'3", but just unbelievably tough guy. But I just think to a man, they would all tell you that irrespective of the athlete, the mental conditioning and the mental desire to succeed is 90% of what you have to do, because there are SEALs that are 5'3", there are SEALs that are 6'6", and everything in between. But ultimately, all of them have got the toughest mind. The 6 inches between their ears is the toughest thing on earth, because that's really what their whole life is about, is being able to deal with extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme pain, extreme, staying up conditions where you have to stay awake for 7 days at a time, whatever. Be on your game. Don't make mistakes. Don't misfire weapons, and do all the things you have to do, in a split second. So, the mental part of the game is so much more deep than anything else. And I would recommend to any young person that you check out the history of what the SEALs are really about and read about what they do and understand what they do, because the physical part, you can get into that, but unless you have the mental part, you can always become physically fit. But unless you have the mental ability, it's not your game. It's not what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why they wash out 80 to 90% of all candidates.
How about, I know you've made a point, Scott, in talking about the SEALs that there's a family involved too most often, and they're as important as the SEAL themselves. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Well, I think, like for example with Taya's story, and and ultimately what she experienced at the end, which was for the most unbelievably ironic of reasons, and the word ironic really doesn't do it justice, but the women and the wives and the families that have to stay at home are always exposed to extreme doubt. And all aspects of the military have got the away from home and the danger factor to it, but with the SEALs, many times you don't know where your husband is, even if he's in this country. I mean, they deploy or train 260 days, 270 days a year. So even when they're here, they're still out training, they're still out deploying, they're still out learning how to steal cars and jump out of airplanes and shoot guys at 2,000 yards, and all the things they have to learn, all the skill set never ends as far as the training is concerned. And one of the things Ryan says accurately in the book is, while you might see these events that are unbelievably public, at the end of the day, it's a very blue-collar job. It's a very difficult, tough, every day, grind it out, in the water, in the sand, train, break down, tear a knee ligament, recover, whatever it is. It's a very, very difficult, physically and mentally taxing job at the best of worlds. Mm-hmm. And when you're actually deployed in foreign lands, then your comms become almost non-existent. If you're in SEAL Team 6, even if you have comms, communications with home, you can't say where you are, what you're doing, or how long you're going to be there. In the regular SEAL teams, it's the same way, although there's a little bit more latitude. But the division from the family is graphic all the time. And so it's very difficult on the families in the best of times. Divorce rate's about 85%.
Wow.
I would say, yeah.
And Scott, in reading the book, you find out, not everything always goes right in these, when they're put out into the field. And it just struck me, almost knocked me over. I was on about page 3 as far as I got, and already you gave a very graphic description of what happened to this Chad Burkhart. And could you tell that story? It's just stunning.
Well, yeah, and Chad's story was, it was important for me as a writer because it was important to Ryan as a person. And it was the first guy he lost after he'd had his son. So, as a commander, you try and plan everything out as deeply as you can. You try and plan out every single extract, every single move, every single refueling, everything from the point A in the mission to point Z in the mission. You got to cover everything in between to try and give your men the best chance they can of survival in hostile conditions. And so Ryan was in command of that operation, although it was not his team. It was in Bosnia-Herzegovina during the Bosnian War. And unfortunately, with the best of planning and everything else, the helicopter, it was a very dark night. They were going in to do a infiltrate and I think a snatch and grab on some bad guy. And but the helicopter was coming in. You got dark. No, there's no lights on. You're all darked out. Everything's darked out in the cockpit and everything else. And in the best of conditions, the guy that's in charge of the helicopter looks at him and gives the thumbs up, and the guy that's the chief for that group gives thumbs up back, opens up the door, and jumps 300 feet off the ground. So it killed him, and it was his mistake. It was a communication error, but it was a dark night, and these things happen. This is a dangerous job. I mean,
he thought they were on the ground.
He thought they were on the ground, and he jumped out at 300 feet, and obviously that's 30 stories. You're not going to survive that. So essentially, there was errors that were made. Could have been training errors, but these guys work together all the time. I mean, if it's like this, boom, boom, they know the hand signals, exactly what it is. When you say boom, there's no green light, you don't jump out of the deck. And so it was a mistake. Mistakes happen even quicker and more. Anyway, so, but Ryan, for his part, had to write that letter to the parents and deal with the funeral and everything else. And it's like, the kid is a typical SEAL. Unbelievably good athlete, unbelievably good student, unbelievably patriotic, all these things, and an only son. And so you got to write that letter to those parents and tell them, hey, your kid's dead. And, and for Ryan, it bugged him. And anybody who thinks right now that it's the wrong thing for, say, for example, President Trump to make decisions to have military guys in his cabinet don't understand what these guys know. They don't understand what they go through. And like, for example, with Ryan, he is the last man to send one of your kids into battle unless he has absolutely the best equipment, absolutely the best chance of survival. And it affects him deeply and personally when he loses a man. And so that's the guy you want in a cabinet, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I just think, say what you want about President Trump, but the fact that he surrounds himself at this point with people of Ryan's character and ability is
Exactly.
really something.
And and the thing is with Trump, like, even though these men are going to be running different cabinet positions, and I know this for a fact because I was kind of involved in the process of his getting chosen in a weird way, because the book was then out, and the book was then written, or read, I should say, by a friend of ours who just happens to be a billionaire in Montana, who hunts with one of the Trump kids, who said, hey, read this about this guy, and it ended up being, kind of an intimate deal, because it was really a circle that was pretty small that were making these decisions, and and it just turns out also that Ryan was also his commanding officer when they took Fallujah and Ramadi in Iraq was, General Mattis. And so he is personal friends with Mattis, and Mattis highly respects Ryan. And I have one of my favorite stories in the book is one time Mattis is up, because Mattis is kind of like a Patton type general, really near the front, very much a guy that's on the line, that wants to see exactly where the troops are at, where the bad guys are at, what's going on. And Ryan is up, like standing up above a berm, and there's a river here, and the bad guys are on the other side of one of the rivers they're at. And he's like describing all this stuff out in front of him, and all of a sudden Ryan gets knocked down by one of the sergeants, in the command, in Mattis's command, and just thrown to the ground. And he's looking at him, he's looking around, and he's like, I'm commander, and this guy just knocks me to the ground. He's like, kind of looking at him like, what's up? He didn't say anything or something like that. And the guy turns around, he looks up on the side of the building on the wall there, and there's bullet holes coming in. He's like, sir, they're shooting at you. Yeah, this is Mattis is there. So they're close enough where these guys are trying to shoot the officers, that are trying to describe the battle scene. But it's a great story of these guys. I mean, these guys, and Ryan's so engrossed in saying, no, this is the way we ought to do it. This is where we ought to send our men. Like, he didn't even know he was being shot at. Yeah.
Let's see, the Congressman Zinke he gives the term for what normally one would just say is torture. He calls it enhanced control tactics. And I wondered if you, given you spent a lot of time with the congressman, he seems to have a specific viewpoint about whether or not these tactics of how you treat prisoners will make a difference. Can you comment on whether?
And Ryan he's the story that we talked about in the book is, I couldn't give his full position, but I will say this: Ryan will take whatever means is necessary to save United States military lives. Okay, so there is no hard and fast definition for Ryan to say, I will never use this enhanced technique or this. He's not going to violate the Geneva Convention, I don't think, but SEALs do things in the dark of night that many other forces don't, because they're tasked to get bad guys that might be holding American prisoners or whatever else in places that people don't understand, or weapons, whatever. If there's a nuclear bomb that's being placed in Los Angeles right now, I would call the SEAL teams to find out where it was. Anyway, but long story short, these guys understand that every situation has its own set of rules, and when I talked about the Abu Ghraib prison, where they had a general that was high up, that was actually, they found out was trying to kill General Sanchez, and was in charge of this whole insurgent group that was targeting General Sanchez, who was the general commander-in-chief, or commander of all forces in Iraq at the time. So they rolled this bad guy up, this general, and they said, look, he was a general that was also a general inside Saddam Hussein's, command. So, and he'd been tortured by Hussein. And when I say tortured by Hussein, he had scars all over his back and knife marks and burn marks and all. This is a general. So this guy was not going to be, let's just say, subject to enhanced interrogation techniques, but they needed to know what he knew. And so Ryan and a few of the other commanders decided that, the guy had a family, and they took the family to Abu Ghraib prison, And they parked his van next to Abu Ghraib prison, never did a single thing, and marched his family in the front door of the prison and out the back door of the prison that he couldn't see. The guy started talking and said, here's the bad guys, here's where it is, everything else. So there wasn't an intense technique used whatsoever. Some people here might blanch at that, but when you're in the middle of a war, whatever, the women weren't touched, the kids weren't touched, they were marched through a door, and that door had enough in that guy's mind to basically psychologically mess him up enough where he told exactly what they needed to know, and they stopped the hit on General Sanchez. So that being said, I think what that shows you is that SEALs are not only industrious, but they'll use whatever resources they have. They believe that's best going to get the job done for American troops. I mean, they're not here they're not negotiators. They're not peace activists. They're SEALs.
Yeah.
And that's their job, is to get the job done and to save American lives. And it's the same thing with Chris Kyle. I mean, Chris Kyle was not deployed to negotiate with the other side. You shoot at my guys, I kill you, period. That's the end of the story. That's his job, was to shoot bad guys, and he was very good at it. And so, and there's a lot of guys out there that came back here because of him being there. And I think that's the key for what I like to write about, is that attitude.
Yeah.
Benghazi,
in your book, the Congressman Zinke has a definite point of view. What would you like to?
Well, Ryan was very disappointed. He knew Ty. He put Ty and Glenn through training. I knew Ty. Ty was a personal friend of mine. And Ty Woods, who was killed in Benghazi. And actually I know Ty's wife really well too. But, there's a few things you don't do. And, and you don't, when Americans are in harm's way, you don't leave them. And so that's absolutely so paramount, in contravention to the attitude of the SEAL teams, let alone what I consider to be any commander that's worth his salt or her salt in the United States military, is that you just don't do that. And we both felt like, there was things that could have been done. I wrote another book with another friend of mine called Eyes on Target, where we describe a variety of options that were available even before the latest stuff that's come out, where we had men, in Spain, we had another fast attack team, apparently in Italy as well, none of which were deployed. All the assets we had in Italy, all the fast movers we had at Sigonella, at Aviano, all the things that could have been done that weren't done, some of which were depicted in the movie 13 Hours, that came directly out of one of my books, and I never sued anybody, but I probably could have. Anyway, but I actually liked it, so I was good with it. It's like there was a lot of things that could have been done. Ryan was very, very upset by the whole thing because he knew Ty and Glenn personally. I think the SEAL teams as a whole were extremely upset by the lack of action by both the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton. And I like to think that some of the work that I did in writing about it helped to get her defeated. But that's a personal political statement on my part.
Scott, I've got 50 more questions, but it's not fair. I know people in the audience have some as well, so I'd like to, at this point, turn to you. If we could do one favor, the staff is going to come up to the front with microphones. And when you raise your hand and I point to you and you get a mic, can you just wait till we put the mic in your hand so we can hear your question? And we'll just start right here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories with your friends. I think it's controversial that they threw Osama bin Laden out a helicopter into the ocean, and they've never shared a picture of his dead body. What does your SEAL team say about that, and what is your take on it?
I heard they just kicked him off the side of the ship, but you could have been a helicopter. Anyway, as far as, guys that are military men, that are warriors like them, the political ramifications of, for example, kicking, Osama bin Laden's body off the thing, I'm not certainly suggesting to you that that's not important, because it probably is to the public in general, and maybe even to political ramifications. But as far as they're concerned, the guy that does the foreword for this book is Rob O'Neill. Rob O'Neill saw Osama bin Laden in front of him, shot him in the left eye and shot him in the right eye, and that was the end of the story. That's their job. Their job is not to worry about, because I mean, I think they look at as a warrior. I don't think they care where their body is going to be buried either. It's like, this is my job. So I'm not diminishing or any way saying that your question is not probably important in the political aspect. But I'll tell you this right now: as warriors, their job is to kill the bad guy. What you want to do with his body after it's done, whether we sit there and drink a beer and do whatever over the top of it, we don't care. They don't care. They really don't. It's almost, that's a decision that's made by people that are a different pay grade and really a different part of the job. Their job is to end the life.
I just think that I've read sometimes that they're thinking that he's really not dead.
I know he's dead. I know who shot him.
I guess that's the thing.
Yeah. No, I would bet my life. I bet my life on it. That he's dead. And I bet my life on it because I know the guys that shot him. I know the guys that are standing right there. Like I said, Rob O'Neill, who killed bin Laden, is the guy that did the foreword for the book. I know Rob personally. I mean, Z knows him personally. I've seen the pictures off his cell phone. So he killed him.
Yeah. Over here.
Scott, isn't it true that all the SEALs are waterboarded in training?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, that's not even a form of extreme torture for them. I mean, that's just part of their whole search and evasion tactics and everything else. And you think that waterboarding is hazing? You go through SEAL teams hazing, man. I'm telling you what, those boys, they work each other over. That's a tough job to be a freshman class of a SEAL team. The new guy is a very, very difficult job, and there's no form of hazing that's not available to him. I guarantee it.
Right over here.
I saw an interview with Commander Zinke where he talked about his experience in the Boy Scouts, specifically about being an Eagle Scout.
Right.
I see that you've an Eagle Scout also. Here in California, the Boy Scouts are almost an endangered species. There's cities like West Hollywood that don't let the Boy Scouts use parks and recreation buildings. One of Jerry Brown's appointees, James Hume, about 2 years ago, pushed a ruling through the California Judicial Council that said any judge in California who was a scoutmaster or had anything to do with the Boy Scouts was violating the judicial canon of ethics for California judges and was showing bias. So I'm kind of curious, given your experience yourself in the Scouts, Commander Zinke, and all this, what do you think about California and the Boy Scouts?
Well, I'll use a BS because I can't say what else I think about it. I personally feel that the attack on our youth and the organizations of our youth that support a code of ethics and do not support any anti-gay message or anything else. There was never any anti-gay message when I was growing up as a Boy Scout, nor is there now, which is what these guys try and, quote, point out in their whole attack on the Boy Scouts. I think it's what's wrong with our society. I think it's a greater problem than just the Boy Scouts. I think that we don't try to give a code of ethics to our youth, and as a result, our youth have, I believe, gone downhill in not only their upbringing, but also in their mental ability to be the next generation of leaders in our country. And Ryan and I are unabashed in our support of the Boy Scouts, and I defy anyone to tell me something differently.
Right here.
Did Chris Kyle share with you what was going on in his mind with that incident with Jesse Ventura? What could you share with us?
Jesse.
I want to hear gory details.
Yeah, as we just got out of the Supreme Court. I have a statement that I give on that because there are still things that are going on legally. And I've discussed it with Jesse personally. I was not there that evening. I know a lot of SEALs that were there that evening that testified at the trial. I know what I was told took place that evening. But I will say this, I have unfortunately been at bars where there have been fights in the past. I may have been involved in some of it at some point in time. I don't know. But one thing is certain, with any disagreement in a bar, there could be 10 witnesses and there'll be 20 different stories. Okay, so I don't know. I wasn't there. I wish Jesse would move on with his life. Okay, I'm hopeful that now he might, but publicly, that's where I leave it.
Right here.
Well, Bill was part of it. Bill was part. Yeah, Bill was part of it, no doubt.
Right here.
Got a question. I haven't followed Richard Marcinko's. Is Richard Marcinko still with us?
Oh yeah.
Is he as scary up front as he looked
You know,
like?
Dick is an amazing guy.
He still got the beard?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh yeah, and he still can drink.
You
any one
wouldn't
of us
want to
in
meet
here
him
under the table.
in a
But
dark alley.
no, Dick is an amazing piece of Americana, and he's the father of SEAL Team 6, and he was asked to put together SEAL Team 6. Like I said, after Operation Eagle Claw was such a resounding failure under the Carter administration, and Dick, had his own controversies in his career and was actually prosecuted for some stuff that I felt shouldn't have happened, but he teed off a few admirals that maybe he shouldn't have teed off. But that being said, Dick is an amazing guy. He's a patriot. He is an amazing part of our military system that we now see the results of at this day and age. But really, he was the founding father of that whole attitude of never quit. And I think that this country deserves him a big debt of gratitude. I really do.
This woman right here, yes, ma'am.
Good evening. The nightmare known as Extortion 17, will we ever see someone held accountable, and what are the current ripples now amongst?
I know a lot of the mothers and a lot of the wives. I knew 2 of the guys on that bird when it went down. Tragic, historically, the most severe loss of SEAL team personnel in the history of the United States military, history of the SEALs. Millions and millions of dollars in personal assets lost, and I just mean the men's training lost. This is a whole platoon of SEAL Team 6 that was taken out. I don't think there's any doubt about it what happened. The guys that ended up putting that RPG through the door of that helicopter were identified as being bad guys before they shot the shot. There was an AC-130 Spectre in the area that, under any reasonable rules of engagement, should have engaged and killed them because they were in an LZ, a hot LZ, which is a landing zone for a helicopter that was then descending into the area, and they saw them with the weapon, asked for the green light to engage, and did not get it. It is a picture of the failure of the Obama administration to adequately give rules of engagement to protect United States military and other zones. And one of the happiest days ever is when Trump got in there and got General Mattis and Ryan Zinke and a few others in the cabinet, because I can assure you those rules of engagement are going to change.
As a protocol, like the president and vice president not traveling together, though, is that normal, or is that continued where that many assets are all at one time in one vehicle?
I don't know that the analogy between the president and the vice president and that many assets would be applicable. Obviously, there's rules because the president and the vice president, if one goes out, then the other one has to be ready to command. That being said, was it a mistake, or was it ill-advised to have a single extract vehicle like that with that many assets on it in a hot LZ, the way that whole firefight was going down? Absolute travesty. I mean, an absolute travesty at best. And the fact that they couldn't be protected by an air asset as strong as an AC-130 overhead at the time just adds insult and loss to, an amazingly tragic event. That's all I can say.
Yes, over here, and then we'll come to you.
Hi. My wife and I grew up in Montana, so we've been aware of Ryan Zinke for some time. And I want to go back and just briefly refer to something that you talked about, which was the bin Laden experience. And during that exercise, actually one of the helicopters was lost. And what I'm really interested in is how Ryan Zinke then, what he would look for in SEALs, and how would he train them so that they could react to unknowns, make decisions, and carry out a mission. And I'm wondering what insights you got for that.
Well, I think particularly in a case like that where a mission does not go linear. In other words, it doesn't go by the way that you planned it. You have something that happens, you lose a chopper, you got to bip it, blow it in place, and try and get rid of the asset as much as possible, because that was a very high-end chopper, and one that the Chinese apparently were very interested in too. But the bottom line is, that's what the SEALs are all about. Nothing ever goes the way you plan it. Nothing ever goes the way you think the mission is going to go. And mentally, they are prepared to make that decision and shift to the next dimension immediately, because that's exactly what they are. Those guys are never put into a situation where they think, oh gosh, this is just going to be another day and we're going to have this happen or that happen, whatever else. They are mentally prepared to go with plan B, to go with plan C, and then to shoot their way out of plan D if they have to get back and steal vehicles, do whatever they got to do to get back. They always got a contingency plan in mind, and that's why, you don't send out automatons or robots. You send out SEALs, and they're gonna look at 10 different ways to get you, no matter if the first 9 didn't work, they're still gonna go with number 10, and that's exactly a good example. You just go with plan B. I mean, you lose a chopper 70 miles inside Pakistani territory, which is a dangerous thing to happen. You blow it up and go with plan B, complete the mission.
Right here, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you for sharing the stories of these American heroes. It's important that they're told. My question is, seeing that you spend so much time with these elite warriors, do they reconcile the work they do, the carnage they witness and participate in? Do they reconcile those visions differently than other soldiers do who find themselves in very hot firefights? The mental aspect, when, I'm speaking in relation to PTSD, do the elite forces reconcile what they do differently?
I would have to say yes. And the reason I say that is they can still function after all these things happen. And, one of the most difficult things for me, you talk about reconcile, killing the other side. That's not even something they think about for 10 minutes. What's hard for them to reconcile is when the guy next to him gets killed. And that's the event that really does damage mentally to them. I mean, because the rest of it is that's their job. And and a lot of that, although it does take a toll, I'm sure, at some deeper level, on the surface, the ones that really, really bother them is when one of their teammates gets killed or whatever else, But by the same token, when we lost Chris, I'll give you for example, I was really dealing with the fact that, was it because of the book and he became famous that he was killed? If he hadn't done the book and he hadn't become famous, would he have been killed? There was a lot of things that went through my mind when that happened that you have to go through. And the best therapy for me on a personal level was his teammates, and they're like, look, dude, okay, that could have been me, that could have been him. I've had guys sitting right next to me that have been shot in the head for no other reason than they were sitting right next to me, whatever else. You gotta let it go. You gotta let it go, because we're gonna lose guys in this business. This is not Sunday school. This is a very dangerous business, and we are always losing people, and it's part of our job is to be there because that's what we wanted to do. I mean, we became adrenaline junkies. We live off of high testosterone events and very difficult situations. We excel with danger. We want to do this job, but by the same token, we know we're going to lose people. And so, do they reconcile? I don't know. Was the PTS aspect of Chris's life important to him? You bet it was. And Chris went through a lot more than a lot of other people did. That being said, I don't have a complete answer to that question, but I will say this. They have a soul like everybody else, and at the end of the day, they definitely know what happens, and they know they deal with it afterwards. So it happens.
We have time for one last question before we have to split. Right over here, sir. Yeah.
It's easy to see that your patriotism shines through. Did you give any thought as a young man to joining military service?
I was
and like myself, if we had it to do over again, would we make a different decision?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I was accepted to the United States Air Force Academy, and got 3 appointments from 2 congressmen and a senator from Oregon, where I grew up. Decided not to go. Because I ended up playing and going to Oregon State University, and it was a different vision, different decision, and everything else. I often regret that I didn't do it, I guess because I wanted to fly jets and I wanted to kind of do that world. But by the same token, I'm not going to look back and my dad was in the military. My dad was a P-38 Lightning pilot in World War II, so there was a lot of military history in my background. So, would it have been different? Quite possibly. Would I have met Chris Kyle and wrote American Sniper? Probably not. So who knows which way it goes.
Well, Scott, it's been an honor to have you here. I just, on behalf of everyone who came out tonight, we're so fortunate to have you as a terrific writer and to have you visit here, and you're welcome back anytime.
Well,
Thanks
thank
so
you very
Scott.
much, and I appreciate everybody coming out.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott has